Most cars don't become expensive because of one big failure. They become expensive because of small things that quietly add up over time. A sound that gets ignored, a habit that feels harmless, a delay that feels reasonable in the moment. Experienced drivers don't rely on secret tricks. They notice patterns early and adjust before problems turn into bills. That awareness matters more than most people realize. According to American Automobile Association research, 35% of US drivers admit they skip or delay recommended vehicle maintenance, increasing the risk of preventable breakdowns. This video isn't about shortcuts or risky fixes. It's about everyday habits that protect your car long before warning lights appear. If avoiding regret later sounds worthwhile, consider subscribing. What comes next can change how you approach ordinary driving decisions most people never question. Hack number 1. The daily habit that shortens component life. One of the fastest ways cars wear out isn't aggressive driving. It's something far more common, using the car before it's ready, then pushing it as if nothing needs time to adjust. Most drivers do it without thinking, because nothing feels wrong in the moment. The engine starts, the car moves, everything seems fine. What's happening underneath is different. Fluids are still circulating, components haven't reached stable operating conditions. Metal parts experience stress before they're properly lubricated or balanced. The damage doesn't show today. It shows years later as premature failures that feel random. Experienced drivers don't rush this process. They drive gently at the beginning, letting systems settle naturally. Not because they're careful, but because they understand wear is cumulative. That small adjustment reduces strain on parts designed to last, not to be shocked into motion. The long-term difference is clear. Drivers who ignore this habit often face early replacements that feel unavoidable. Drivers who adjust early quietly extend component life by years. The cost gap isn't dramatic in 1 month, but over ownership, it adds up to thousands. Hack number 2. Preventing damage that starts while the car is parked. Most people assume a parked car is a protected car. No movement, no stress, no wear. But time alone can be just as damaging as mileage. Heat, pressure, moisture, and uneven loading all keep working long after the engine is off. Drivers often misjudge what safe parking really means. Slight slopes, tight spaces, leaving weight settled in one direction. These things feel minor, but over time they place constant pressure on specific systems. That pressure doesn't announce itself. It quietly weakens parts designed for movement, not static strain. Experienced drivers make small adjustments before walking away. Where they park, how they leave the wheel positioned, whether the car rests evenly. These choices don't take effort, but they prevent stress from building silently overnight. The payoff usually shows up later, as avoided surprises. Fewer sudden steering issues. Less unexplained noise. Fewer repairs blamed on age. The car hasn't stayed healthier by luck. It's been allowed to rest properly. Hack number 3. Extending parts life without replacing anything. Many parts get replaced long before they're actually finished. A slight change in performance shows up, something feels a little off, and replacement feels like the responsible move. It brings closure. The problem is solved, or so it seems. But in many cases, the part wasn't failing. It was simply showing early wear that could have been managed. Replacement is often recommended because it's straightforward. It's fast. It creates certainty. Prevention and restoration require explanation, patience, and judgment. Experienced drivers learn to tell the difference between a component that's worn out and one that's just beginning to drift from ideal condition. They focus on restoring balance before assuming something is beyond saving. That mindset dramatically extends part life. Minor wear gets addressed before it spreads. Small issues are stabilized instead of allowed to multiply. Systems remain balanced because they're not being reset through unnecessary replacements. When parts are replaced too early, new stress often appears elsewhere, creating a cycle of follow-up issues that feel unrelated but aren't. The benefits of this approach don't show up overnight. They build quietly across years of ownership. Fewer parts get replaced prematurely. Fewer secondary problems appear after repairs. Decisions happen less frequently, and when they do, they're calmer and more informed. This is what experience provides. Not shortcuts or tricks, but patience paired with understanding. Knowing when something truly needs replacement and when it simply needs attention. keeps cars reliable longer and costs lower, without sacrificing performance or peace of mind. Hack number 4. The small sound you should never ignore. Drivers get used to sounds faster than they realize. A faint squeak that only happens in certain moments. A soft click that comes and goes. Because the car still runs, those noises fade into the background. They become part of the routine and are easy to dismiss. Those sounds are rarely meaningless. They're early signals, small movements where components no longer meet as smoothly as they should. Slight contact where friction has begun. At this stage, nothing feels urgent. That's why they're so often ignored. But when friction is left alone, it grows. A noise turns into wear. Wear spreads into damage, and damage eventually becomes failure. Experienced drivers respond differently. They don't panic every time something sounds different, but they also don't normalize change. They pay attention to when a sound appears, how often it repeats, and whether it grows more noticeable. That awareness allows them to address causes early, before stress compounds. This approach isn't about fixing everything immediately. It's about timing. Early attention usually involves simple adjustments. Late attention almost always involves larger repairs. The cost difference between those two moments can be significant. The real gap between expensive problems and manageable ones isn't mechanical knowledge. It's listening while issues are still quiet. Experienced drivers understand that cars warn before they fail, but only if you don't train yourself to ignore what you hear. Hack number 5. The way experienced drivers protect what they touch most. Interior wear is often dismissed as unavoidable. Fading surfaces, cracks forming over time, areas that look worn simply because the car has been used. Most drivers accept this as normal aging. In reality, interior damage usually comes from repeated contact combined with neglect, not from time alone. Everyday use slowly breaks materials down. Hands transfer oils and moisture. Sunlight weakens surfaces that were never meant to handle constant exposure. Friction builds in the same places again and again. None of this causes immediate failure, so it's easy to ignore. But left alone, minor wear deepens until it becomes permanent damage. Experienced drivers approach interiors differently. They treat the parts they touch most the way they treat tools they rely on. Not with heavy cleaning or constant attention, but with light, regular care. Small habits interrupt damage before it compounds. The goal isn't appearance, it's longevity. When interiors are neglected, problems stop being cosmetic. Controls lose responsiveness. Surfaces harden and crack. Repair turns into replacement, and replacement is rarely cheap. At that point, restoration is the only option. Quiet, consistent care prevents that path entirely. Interiors stay functional longer because materials are protected before they break down. Over time, this approach preserves comfort, usability, and value without effort. That's the difference experience makes, knowing which small habits protect the things you interact with every single day. Before going further, it's worth pausing. Most drivers aren't careless. They weren't taught what matters early enough. Cars today are quieter, smoother, and better at hiding stress until it's too late. Experience isn't about driving longer. It's about noticing sooner. The difference between expensive ownership and manageable ownership isn't discipline. It's awareness. Small adjustments made consistently protect systems long before failure becomes visible. That's what separates frustration from confidence. Not effort, not money, just understanding where attention belongs. And with that perspective reset, the next sections start to matter even more. If practical car knowledge that saves money and prevents problems matters to you, consider subscribing. Hack number 6. Using built-in features. Most drivers never learn. Most modern vehicles already include features meant to make driving smoother, safer, and less stressful. The problem isn't that cars lack capability, it's that many of these features are never properly introduced. They're added quietly, hidden in settings, or mentioned briefly in manuals that few people read. Over time, drivers assume their car simply doesn't have certain functions and look elsewhere for solutions. Manuals often feel overwhelming and disconnected from real driving. People learn their cars through repetition, not instruction pages. If a feature isn't obvious within the first few weeks of ownership, it fades into the background. That's where experience makes the difference. Experienced drivers approach ownership with familiarity rather than urgency. They notice how the car responds, what controls exist, and how features interact during everyday use. Not because they're searching for tricks, but because long-term use reveals what the car already provides. They learn capabilities gradually instead of assuming something is missing. Using built-in features properly avoids unnecessary spending on upgrades and add-ons. It also prevents misuse that causes wear or frustration. Convenience improves, stress drops, decisions become simpler because the car is being used as designed. The real value isn't in adding more technology, it's in understanding what's already there and applying it correctly. When drivers take advantage of features they already own, ownership becomes easier and more predictable. Hack number 7. Avoiding services that sound responsible but aren't needed. Some services are designed to sound reassuring. They're framed as preventative, protective, or simply the responsible thing to do. When they're presented that way, declining can feel risky, even careless. Many drivers agree, not because the service is urgent, but because uncertainty feels worse than the cost. Experienced drivers approach these situations differently. They don't dismiss maintenance or assume recommendations are wrong. Instead, they evaluate timing. They ask whether the issue needs attention now or whether it can be monitored safely. The focus isn't on saying no, it's on understanding why something is being suggested and what happens if it's delayed. Not every issue develops at the same pace. Some problems worsen quickly and should be addressed early. Others change slowly and don't become harmful if watched carefully. Experience teaches how to tell the difference without panic. That perspective prevents rushed decisions made under pressure. This judgment alone often saves hundreds over time. Not by skipping care, but by applying it at the right moment. The car stays reliable, while unnecessary expenses are avoided. Confidence replaces doubt, and ownership becomes deliberate instead of reactive. When drivers understand timing, maintenance stops feeling like a gamble and starts feeling controlled. Hack number 8. The weather habit that separates new drivers from veterans. Weather rarely causes damage all at once. It works slowly. Heat dries and weakens materials. Cold stiffens parts that are meant to flex. Moisture settles into areas that don't show signs until much later. That's why weather-related problems feel sudden, because the damage started long before anything looked wrong. New drivers usually respond after symptoms appear. A noise, a failure, a repair that seems unlucky. Experienced drivers think differently. They prepare before conditions change, not by overhauling routines, but by making small adjustments that reduce stress when temperatures swing or conditions become harsh. The car isn't treated the same way in every season, because the environment isn't the same. This mindset is simple but powerful. It's not about fear or constant attention. It's about understanding that weather affects vehicles quietly and continuously. When drivers recognize that influence early, decisions change. Care becomes timed instead of reactive. One season handled thoughtfully can extend the life of multiple components. Materials last longer. Systems stay balanced. Problems that normally appear months later never form at all. The benefit doesn't feel dramatic in the moment, which is why many people miss it. But over years of ownership, that awareness prevents failures that seem unpredictable to everyone else. Experience isn't about driving in perfect conditions. It's about adapting calmly when conditions aren't. And that adaptability is one of the most reliable ways veteran drivers protect their cars without extra cost or effort. Hack number 9. Protecting systems that fail without warning. Some vehicle systems don't give advance notice when they're reaching their limits. They function normally until, one day, they don't. There's no gradual noise, no visible alert, just sudden loss of function that feels random and unfair. These are the failures most drivers describe as happening out of nowhere. In reality, very little happens without a cause. Stress builds quietly. Wear accumulates internally in places drivers never see and rarely think about. The early signs exist, but they're subtle, too small to demand attention, unless you understand where vulnerability hides. Without that awareness, problems only become visible when damage is already done. Experienced drivers approach these systems differently. They don't wait for reassurance through sound or warning lights. They take small preventive steps early, not because something seems wrong, but because they know which systems don't speak loudly before they fail. This approach isn't about anxiety or over-maintenance. It's about understanding patterns that repeat across ownership. By protecting these vulnerable systems in advance, experienced drivers remove uncertainty from driving. There's less wondering, less reacting. Fewer moments of being caught off guard by a sudden problem that forces immediate decisions. Instead of managing emergencies, they prevent them quietly. The real payoff here isn't just financial. It's peace of mind. Driving feels calmer when you trust that certain failures are far less likely to surprise you. That confidence, knowing you've reduced the risk of the most disruptive breakdowns, is one of the most underrated advantages experience provides. Hack number 10. The costly mistake caused by rushing. Rushing rarely feels dangerous in the moment. It shows up in small decisions that seem harmless, pulling away quickly, forcing movements, skipping brief pauses that feel unnecessary. Nothing breaks right away, so the habit feels justified. But wear doesn't announce itself when it begins. It builds quietly through repeated pressure. Time pressure changes how drivers interact with their cars. Inputs become abrupt instead of smooth. Systems are pushed to respond instantly rather than being allowed to transition naturally. That repeated stress doesn't create one obvious failure. It creates fatigue, and fatigue is what shortens the life of components that otherwise would last much longer. Experienced drivers don't move slower because they have more time. They move smarter because they've learned what rushing costs. They build small buffers into daily routines, leaving moments earlier, finishing actions fully instead of forcing them. Those habits remove urgency without adding delay. The drive still gets done, the wear simply doesn't. The long-term benefit shows up quietly. Fewer repairs caused by habit. Fewer issues that feel sudden and unexplained. The car holds up better because it isn't being asked to absorb unnecessary stress. When urgency fades, control takes its place. And that shift alone reduces ownership costs more than most repairs ever could. Hack number 11. The safety feature. Almost no one talks about. Some of the most important features in a car are designed for situations people don't like to think about. They aren't used daily. They don't make driving more comfortable or entertaining. Their only purpose is protection when something goes wrong. Because of that, most drivers never learn where they are or how they work. Emergencies feel distant, so attention stays on convenience instead. If a feature isn't needed during a normal commute, it's easy to assume it doesn't matter. That assumption is exactly why many drivers feel disoriented when stress suddenly replaces routine. In those moments, hesitation costs time, and time matters. Experienced drivers approach safety differently. They don't obsess over worst-case scenarios, but they do take quiet note of what's available if something unexpected happens. Knowing where a safety feature is located and how it operates creates confidence long before it's ever needed. There's no scrambling, no guessing, no added panic layered on top of an already difficult situation. This awareness doesn't change day-to-day driving. It changes how drivers respond when conditions aren't normal. Instead of reacting emotionally, they respond clearly. That clarity often makes the difference between regaining control quickly or losing precious seconds figuring out what to do next. In real situations, knowledge becomes action instantly. Confusion fades. Decisions come faster. That's why experienced drivers value safety features they hope to never use. Not because they expect danger, but because preparedness brings calm when circumstances suddenly shift. Hack number 12. When knowing this changes how you treat your car. This isn't a trick you apply once and forget. It's a change in how you interpret what your car is doing every day. When drivers understand how problems actually develop, decisions stop being reactive. Instead of responding to breakdowns, they respond to early signals. Care becomes intentional, not urgent. Experience changes the meaning of small things. A slight difference in response, a subtle change in feel. Something that once seemed unimportant now becomes useful information. Not something to panic over, but something to note. That shift alone prevents many situations from ever becoming stressful or expensive. Most regret in car ownership comes from hindsight. The moment when a repair is needed, and the question appears, could this have been avoided? Experienced drivers rarely ask that question, because awareness keeps them ahead of that point. They don't wait for confirmation through failure. They act while options are still simple and affordable. The payoff isn't just financial, it's emotional. Fewer surprises means fewer rushed decisions. Fewer rushed decisions mean fewer compromises. Driving feels steadier because ownership feels predictable. Confidence replaces uncertainty, and the car stops feeling like a liability waiting to surprise you. Treating your car differently doesn't mean doing more work. It means understanding where attention matters and where it doesn't. That understanding reshapes ownership entirely. When you see your car through this lens, maintenance stops being a reaction and becomes a quiet form of control that pays off over time. Hack number 13. The one habit that tells you everything else. Early, the most valuable habit experienced drivers develop has nothing to do with tools, parts, or technique. It's the ability to notice change before it turns into an event. New drivers react to failures. Experienced drivers notice patterns forming long before anything actually goes wrong. That difference alone explains why some cars feel reliable for years, while others seem to fall apart without warning. Instead of waiting for alerts, noises, or breakdowns, experienced drivers pay attention to consistency. How the car feels when it moves, how it sounds under the same conditions from one week to the next, how small shifts show up gradually, not suddenly. These changes are easy to miss because they don't demand attention. They only whisper, but they rarely lie. When something feels slightly different, experienced drivers don't panic and they don't ignore it. They make quiet adjustments or take a closer look while the problem is still flexible. That timing matters. Most repairs are inexpensive at the early stage and costly once stress compounds. This habit quietly multiplies savings over time because it keeps decisions calm. There's no urgency, no guessing, no rushed spending under pressure. Issues get addressed while options are still open, instead of after damage has already spread. If you remember nothing else from this video, remember this: cars rarely fail without warning. The warning just isn't dramatic. Experience is learning how to recognize those early signals and responding before they turn into regret. Final thought: experience isn't something you're born with, and it isn't something reserved for experts. It's built slowly, by paying attention to patterns most people are never taught to notice. Everything covered here works because it respects how cars actually age. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, through small moments repeated over time. You don't need special tools or deep mechanical knowledge to apply any of this. What matters is timing, awareness, and knowing when a small adjustment today prevents a bigger decision later. Even adopting 2 or 3 of these habits changes the way ownership feels. Fewer surprises, fewer rushed choices, more confidence every time you drive. Smart ownership isn't about doing more. It's about reacting less. When you understand what your car needs and when it needs it, control replaces stress. That's when costs stop feeling random and start feeling manageable. If this video helped you see your car differently, take that perspective with you the next time you drive, park, or decide to wait instead of rush. And if you value calm, practical guidance that helps you avoid regret before it starts, consider subscribing. More insights like this are coming.